Forbidden Christian History, The Secret. The Lost Book of Adam and Eve. Exposes. Have you ever wondered what really happened after the gates of Eden closed? What if I told you that buried beneath centuries of church doctrine lies a forbidden manuscript that reveals truth so profound, so unsettling, that religious authorities have fought to keep it the world? Today, hidden from, we're diving deep into one of the most controversial ancient texts ever discovered, the Lost Book of Adam and Eve. And what we uncover will challenge everything you thought you knew about humanity's earliest days. For over a millennium, this sacred writing has been dismissed, banned, and buried by those who claimed to guard spiritual truth. They called it heretical. They labeled it dangerous. But what if they silenced it not because it was false, but because it was too true? What if this ancient manuscript contains revelations that could shake the very foundations of organized religion? Stay with me, because we're about to explore forbidden territory. We're going to examine why this book was hidden, what secrets it contains, and how it survived against all odds. If you're ready to discover what they never wanted you to know, hit that like button to help us break through the algorithm's barriers, and make sure you're subscribed, because this journey into forbidden history is just beginning. The story begins not in the grand libraries of Rome or the ancient monasteries of Europe, but in the remote highlands of Ethiopia. While Western Christianity was busy deciding which books belonged in their canon and which should be cast aside, Ethiopian monks were preserving something extraordinary. High in their mountain sanctuaries, protected by isolation and unwavering faith, they safeguarded texts that the rest of the world was systematically destroying. Among these precious manuscripts was a book that would challenge everything. Known by various names, the Book of Adam and Eve, the conflict of Adam and Eve with Satan, or sometimes simply the life of Adam and Eve, this ancient text promised to fill the gaps that Genesis left empty. Where the Bible gave us glimpses, this book offered detailed accounts. Where Scripture hinted at deeper truths, this manuscript spoke them plainly. But here's what makes this discovery so remarkable. This wasn't some medieval forgery or later fabrication. Fragments of this text have been traced back to the earliest centuries of Christianity. Ancient Jewish traditions reference similar stories. Ethiopian Christianity, which claims apostolic origins through the encounter between Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch, preserved this book as part of their expanded biblical canon for over 1,500 years. The Ethiopian Bible contains 88 books, not the 66 found in most Protestant Bibles. For centuries, scholars dismissed this expanded collection as corrupted or unreliable. But recent archaeological discoveries have begun to vindicate the Ethiopian tradition. Time and again, texts they preserved have proven to be older and more authentic than anyone in the West. Image-crucial question: who'ined possible? This brings us to a decided what belonged in the Bible and what didn't. The answer might surprise you. The biblical canon as we know it today wasn't established by divine revelation or apostolic decree. It was shaped by a series of church councils, political considerations, and theological debates that stretched across several centuries. The Council of Nicaea in 325 AD is often credited with finalizing the biblical canon, but that's not entirely accurate. While Nicaea did address important theological questions, the biblical canon remained fluid for centuries afterward. Different regions of the Christian world accepted different collections of books. What we call the New Testament wasn't formally recognized in its current form until much later. And even then, various Christian traditions maintain their own unique collections. The Ethiopian Church, claiming direct apostolic succession and maintaining independence from both Rome and Constantinople, preserved texts that other traditions gradually abandoned. They kept the Book of Enoch when others rejected it. They maintained the Book of Jubilees when it disappeared elsewhere. And they safeguarded the Book of Adam and Eve when the rest of Christianity forgot it existed. This raises uncomfortable questions about authority. and authenticity. If the Ethiopian tradition is older and more continuous than many others, why were their texts dismissed? Why was their expanded canon seen as corrupted rather than complete? The answers often have less to do with scholarly analysis and more to do with political and cultural biases that shaped how different Christian traditions were valued. Now let's examine what makes the lost book of Adam and Eve so controversial. This isn't simply an expanded version of the Garden of Eden story. It's a radical reimagining of humanity's earliest days that includes elements most modern Christians have never encountered. The book begins where Genesis ends, with Adam and Eve's expulsion from paradise. But instead of moving quickly to their children and the spread of humanity, it lingers in their immediate aftermath. It describes their first night outside Eden, their confusion and terror, their desperate attempts to find their way back to the garden they had lost. According to this ancient text, Adam and Eve didn't immediately understand what had happened to them. The transition from divine beings walking with God to mortal humans struggling for survival wasn't instantaneous. They spent days trying to return to Eden, following false paths and falling into despair when they realized the way back was permanently sealed. The book describes their first shelter, not a comfortable dwelling, but a cave they discovered in their wandering. This wasn't just any cave, according to the text. It was called the Cave of Treasures, and it would become central to their survival and their spiritual journey. Here, the book claims, Adam and Eve began to learn what it meant to be human, to be mortal, to be separated from the immediate presence of their Creator. But perhaps most shocking to modern readers is the book's detailed account of Satan's continued involvement in their lives. Far from disappearing after the temptation in Eden, the text presents Satan as an active, persistent enemy who continued to torment Adam and Eve throughout their earthly existence. The book describes elaborate deceptions, physical attacks, and psychological warfare. Satan appears to them in various disguises, sometimes as an angel of light, sometimes as a trusted friend, sometimes as a divine messenger bringing false hope. He attempts to drive them to despair, to convince them to end their own lives, to abandon their faith in God's ultimate goodness. These aren't symbolic battles or metaphorical struggles. The text presents them as literal encounters with a spiritual enemy who refuse to accept defeat. Satan's goal, according to the book, wasn't simply to cause Adam and Eve's fall. It was to ensure their complete destruction and the failure of God's plan for humanity. One of the most striking episodes describes Satan gathering stones and hurling them at Adam and Eve, trying to kill them through direct physical violence. When that fails, he attempts to drown them by causing a flood. When they survive that, he tries to convince them that God has abandoned them permanently and that suicide is their only escape from endless suffering. But the book also reveals something profound about divine grace. Even in their exile, even in their suffering, God doesn't abandon Adam and Eve. He speaks to them directly, comforts them in their darkest moments, and gradually teaches them how to survive in their new reality. He sends angels to minister to them, provides them with food and shelter, and most importantly, gives them hope that their separation from him is not permanent. The text describes elaborate conversations between God and Adam, discussions about the nature of good and evil, the purpose of suffering, and the ultimate destiny of humanity. These aren't the brief exchanges we find in Genesis. They're extended theological dialogues that explore some of the deepest questions of human existence. Perhaps most significantly, the book claims that God revealed to Adam prophetic visions of the future. Adam is shown the coming of a savior who would ultimately undo the damage caused by the fall. He sees the birth, life, death, and resurrection of Christ thousands of years before these events occur. In essence, the gospel message is revealed to humanity's first parents as a source of hope during their darkest hour. This prophetic element of the book is particularly fascinating because it suggests that salvation history didn't begin with Abraham or Moses, or even Noah. According to this text, the promise of redemption was given to Adam and Eve directly, making them the first recipients of what would later be called the Gospel. The book also provides detailed accounts of Adam and Eve's children, not just Cain, Abel, and Seth, but numerous other sons and daughters whose names and stories have been lost to mainstream biblical tradition. It describes the expansion of the human race, the development of civilization, and the gradual corruption that would eventually lead to the flood. But why was such a detailed, theologically rich text excluded from the biblical canon? The answers are complex and often uncomfortable. Some scholars argue that the book's elaborate supernatural elements, its detailed descriptions of angelic and demonic encounters, were seen as too fantastic for inclusion in Scripture. Others suggest that its extended dialogues and philosophical discussions didn't fit the narrative style that church leaders preferred for the biblical canon. However, there may be deeper reasons for its exclusion. The book presents a version of early human history that emphasizes direct divine revelation and ongoing supernatural intervention in human affairs. It suggests that Adam and Eve maintained a relationship with God even after their fall, receiving continued guidance and prophetic visions. This portrayal might have been threatening to religious authorities who claimed exclusive rights to interpret divine will and mediate between God and humanity. A text that suggested ordinary believers could receive direct revelations and prophetic insights might undermine institutional control over spiritual truth. The book's survival in Ethiopian Christianity provides crucial context for understanding these dynamics. Ethiopian Christianity developed independently from both Roman Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy. It maintained practices and beliefs that other Christian traditions gradually abandoned or explicitly rejected. The preservation of texts like the Book of Adam and Eve reflects this independence and suggests that Ethiopian Christianity may have retained elements of early Christian belief that were lost elsewhere. Recent archaeological discoveries have begun to validate aspects of the Ethiopian tradition that were long dismissed by Western scholars. The discovery of early Christian texts in Egypt, the uncovering of ancient monasteries in remote locations, and the analysis of manuscript traditions have all provided evidence that Ethiopian Christianity preserved authentic early Christian materials that survived nowhere else. This doesn't necessarily mean that every detail in the Book of Adam and Eve should be accepted as historical fact, but it does suggest that this text represents an authentic strand of early Christian thinking about humanity's origins and the nature of spiritual warfare. It preserves traditions and interpretations that were once more widespread but gradually disappeared from mainstream Christianity. The implications of this discovery extend far beyond academic interest in ancient texts. If the Book of Adam and Eve represents authentic early Christian tradition, then our understanding of biblical history and theology may be incomplete. We may have lost crucial insights into the nature of good and evil, the reality of spiritual warfare, and the continuity of divine revelation throughout human history. This is just the beginning of our exploration into this forbidden text. In our next segment, we'll dive deeper into the book's most controversial claims, examine the evidence for its authenticity, and explore what its rediscovery might mean for modern Christianity. We'll uncover specific passages that challenge conventional interpretations of biblical events and investigate why certain religious authorities continue to discourage study of this ancient manuscript. The story of the lost Book of Adam and Eve is more than just an archaeological curiosity. It's a window into a version of Christianity that might have developed very differently if texts like this had remained part of the accepted biblical canon. It's a reminder that the faith we've inherited was shaped by human decisions that weren't necessarily divinely inspired, and that alternative traditions may preserve truths we've forgotten. The deeper we venture into this ancient manuscript, the more we discover that challenges everything we thought we knew about human origins. The lost book of Adam and Eve doesn't just fill gaps in the Genesis account. It reveals a completely different understanding of what it means to be human, what it means to fall from grace, and what it means to find redemption. One of the most startling revelations in this forbidden text concerns the nature of Adam and Eve before their fall. According to this ancient account, they weren't simply innocent humans walking in a garden. They were beings of light, clothed in divine radiance, possessing capabilities that we can barely comprehend today. The book describes Adam's original state in terms that sound almost otherworldly. His body, formed from sacred earth gathered from the four corners of creation, glowed with an inner fire that reflected God's own glory. His eyes burned with divine light, granting him vision that extended beyond the physical realm into spiritual dimensions. He could see the past, the future, and the invisible world of angels and spirits that surrounded him. Eve's creation is described with equal majesty. Rather than being formed from Adam's rib, as commonly interpreted, this text suggests she was crafted from celestial light itself, starlight captured from the heavens and shaped into human form. She possessed wisdom and intuition that perfectly complemented Adam's strength and vision. Together, they represented the complete image of God, neither one subordinate to the other, but both equal partners in divine purpose. This portrayal radically alters our understanding of what was lost in the fall. According to the lost book of Adam and Eve, when our first parents disobeyed God, they didn't simply lose access to a garden. They lost their divine nature, their supernatural abilities, their direct connection to the Creator. The light that once emanated from their beings grew dim. The spiritual sight that once allowed them to perceive invisible realities became clouded. They literally became less than they were created to be. But here's what makes this account so powerful. It insists that this divine spark wasn't completely extinguished. Even in their fallen state, even in their exile from Eden, Adam and Eve retained a glimmer of their original glory. And according to this ancient text, that same spark exists within every human being born since. This understanding transforms how we view human potential and divine purpose. We're not just fallen creatures awaiting salvation. We're beings who carry within us the memory of divine glory, the capacity for spiritual sight, the potential for direct communion with our Creator. The goal of spiritual life isn't just forgiveness for sin, but restoration of our original nature as beings of light. The book's description of Eden itself challenges conventional interpretations. This wasn't simply a beautiful garden with fruit trees and pleasant streams. According to this ancient account, Eden was a dimensional bridge between heaven and earth, a place where spiritual and physical realities intersected perfectly. The text describes 3 sacred trees at Eden's heart, each serving a specific divine purpose. The tree of life offered immortality to those who partook of its fruit. The tree of light granted divine wisdom and spiritual illumination. And the tree of knowledge, the one from which Adam and Eve were forbidden to eat, contained understanding of both good and evil, past and future, the complete spectrum of cosmic truth. The prohibition against eating from the tree of knowledge wasn't arbitrary or cruel, according to this account. It was protective. God knew that such total knowledge would overwhelm beings who hadn't yet developed the spiritual maturity to handle it responsibly. The restriction was meant to be temporary, a safeguard until Adam and Eve had grown in wisdom and character to the point where they could bear such revelation without being corrupted by it. This interpretation completely reframes the story of the fall. The serpent's temptation wasn't offering something evil. It was offering something good before its proper time. The sin wasn't desiring knowledge or wisdom, but wanting to bypass the process of spiritual development that God had designed for their growth. When Adam and Eve chose to eat from the forbidden tree, they gained knowledge they weren't prepared to handle. The immediate result wasn't just shame about their nakedness, it was the overwhelming realization of cosmic truth without the spiritual foundation to process it properly. They saw good and evil, past and future, the full spectrum of creation's pain and glory, and it shattered their innocence without giving them the wisdom to respond appropriately. The text describes their first moments after the fall in heartbreaking detail. They didn't just realize they were naked, they realized they were diminished. The light that once clothed them had faded. The divine vision that once allowed them to perceive spiritual realities had grown dim. For the first time, they saw each other not as beings of glory, but as mere flesh and bone. Their expulsion from Eden wasn't primarily punishment, according to this account. It was mercy. In their diminished state, if they had eaten from the tree of life, they would have been locked forever in a condition of partial knowledge and spiritual blindness. By preventing their access to immortality, God preserved their opportunity for eventual restoration. But perhaps the most controversial aspect of this ancient text is its detailed account of what happened after the expulsion. The lost book of Adam and Eve presents a version of early human history that's far more supernatural, far more dramatic, and far more hopeful than anything found in conventional biblical interpretation. According to this manuscript, Satan's involvement in human affairs didn't end with the temptation in Eden. If anything, it intensified. The text describes a spiritual war that continued for centuries, with Satan and his fallen angels actively working to corrupt and destroy humanity, while God and his holy angels fought to preserve and guide the human race. These weren't metaphorical battles or symbolic struggles. The book presents them as literal confrontations with real consequences. Satan appears to Adam and Eve in various forms, sometimes as an angel of light offering false hope, sometimes as a trusted friend providing deceptive counsel, sometimes as a terrifying enemy launching direct attacks. One of the most chilling episodes describes Satan's attempt to murder Adam and Eve through physical violence. When deception fails to drive them to despair, he resorts to hurling massive stones at them, trying to crush them to death. When they survive that assault, he attempts to drown them by causing a flood. The book presents these as real events, not allegories or spiritual metaphors. But the text also reveals the extent of divine protection and guidance that surrounded humanity's first parents. Even in their exile, even in their suffering, God didn't abandon them. He spoke to them directly, providing comfort, instruction, and most importantly, hope for eventual restoration. The book describes elaborate conversations between God and Adam that explore some of the deepest theological questions imaginable. Why does suffering exist? How can good come from evil? What is the ultimate purpose of human existence? These dialogues read like advanced theological treatises, suggesting that Adam possessed wisdom and insight that we might not expect from someone so recently fallen. Perhaps most remarkably, the text claims that God revealed to Adam prophetic visions of humanity's future salvation. Adam is shown the coming of a Messiah who would undo the damage caused by the fall, restore humanity's divine nature, and ultimately reconcile heaven and earth. In essence, the gospel message, the promise of redemption through divine sacrifice, was revealed to humanity's first parents as a source of hope during their darkest hour. This prophetic element transforms our understanding of salvation history. Instead of beginning with Abraham's call or Moses' revelation, the promise of redemption stretches back to humanity's very beginning. Adam and Eve become the first recipients of what would later be called the gospel, making them not just the source of humanity's problem, but witnesses to its ultimate solution. The book also provides extensive details about Adam and Eve's family life that are completely absent from Genesis. It names their daughters, describes the marriages of their children, and explains how the human race expanded from two individuals to populate the earth. These accounts include information about early human culture, technology, and spiritual development that fills enormous gaps in the biblical narrative. According to this text, Cain and Abel each had twin sisters, and the conflict between the brothers involved not just their offerings to God, but competition for marriage partners. The first murder in human history was motivated not just by jealousy over divine favor, but by romantic rivalry and sexual desire. This adds psychological complexity to the story that makes it feel more human and more believable. The book describes how different branches of Adam's family developed different approaches to life and spirituality. Some, following Cain's example, focused on building cities and developing technology. Others, following Seth's path, emphasized spiritual development and maintaining connection with God. These two streams of human civilization, the technological and the spiritual, would continue throughout history, sometimes complementing each other, sometimes in conflict. But why would such detailed, theologically rich material be excluded from the biblical canon? The answers become clearer when we understand the political and theological pressures that shaped early Christianity. Church leaders weren't just deciding which books were divinely inspired. They were determining which interpretations of Christian faith would be considered orthodox and which would be labeled heretical. The Lost Book of Adam and Eve presents a version of Christianity that emphasizes direct divine revelation, ongoing supernatural intervention, and the possibility of spiritual experiences that transcend normal human limitations. This might have been threatening to religious authorities who claimed exclusive rights to interpret God's will and mediate between heaven and humanity. A text that suggested ordinary believers could receive prophetic visions, experience direct divine communication, and access supernatural wisdom might undermine institutional control over spiritual truth. It's easier to maintain religious authority when divine revelation is confined to officially recognized channels than when it's presented as potentially available to anyone who seeks it with sufficient faith and dedication. The book's preservation in Ethiopian Christianity provides crucial insight into these dynamics. Ethiopian Christianity developed independently from both Roman and Byzantine influences. It maintained practices, beliefs, and texts that other Christian traditions gradually abandoned or explicitly rejected. The fact that they preserved the lost book of Adam and Eve as part of their biblical canon for over 15 centuries suggests they saw value in its message that other traditions chose to suppress. Recent archaeological discoveries have begun to vindicate aspects of Ethiopian Christian tradition that Western scholars long dismissed as corrupted or unreliable. Time and again, texts preserved in Ethiopia have proven to be older and more authentic than anyone imagined possible. This pattern raises uncomfortable questions about whose version of Christianity should be considered more reliable: the traditions that developed in the centers of political power, or those that survived in isolated communities that maintained independence from imperial influence. The implications extend far beyond academic curiosity about ancient manuscripts. If the lost book of Adam and Eve represents authentic early Christian tradition, then our understanding of human nature, divine purpose, and spiritual possibility may be incomplete. We may have inherited a diminished version of Christianity that has forgotten crucial truths about who we are and what we're capable of becoming. This ancient text suggests that the human story isn't just about fall and redemption. It's about remembering and recovering our divine nature. It presents spiritual life not as a matter of following rules or accepting doctrines, but as a journey toward reclaiming the light that was dimmed but never extinguished within us. The book's detailed account of spiritual warfare reminds us that the battles we face aren't just internal struggles with temptation, but participation in a cosmic conflict between good and evil that has raged since the beginning of time. Understanding this context can transform how we approach challenges, setbacks, and apparent defeats in our spiritual journey. Most importantly, the text's emphasis on direct divine communication and prophetic revelation suggests that the age of miracles and supernatural guidance didn't end with the apostolic era. If this ancient account is accurate, then God continues to speak directly to those who seek him with sincere hearts, continues to provide supernatural assistance to those who need it, and continues to reveal prophetic insights to those prepared to receive them. The lost book of Adam and Eve isn't just a historical curiosity. It's a window into a version of Christianity that might have developed very differently if texts like this had remained part of the accepted biblical canon. It challenges us to consider whether the faith we've inherited represents the complete truth or just the portions that survived centuries of theological and political filtering. As we delve deeper into this forbidden manuscript, we encounter revelations that grow increasingly disturbing to conventional religious thought. The lost book of Adam and Eve doesn't just challenge what we've been taught about human origins. It fundamentally reimagines the entire spiritual landscape of existence. One of the most shocking aspects of this ancient text concerns the true nature of time itself within the context of human experience. According to this manuscript, Adam and Eve's exile from Eden wasn't measured in days or weeks, but in what the text calls divine seasons, periods of spiritual testing that could extend far beyond normal human comprehension of temporal duration. The book describes how Adam and Eve experienced what we might call supernatural time dilation during their most intense spiritual trials. Moments of divine communication could stretch into what felt like years of instruction and revelation. Conversely, periods of demonic attack could compress entire lifetimes of suffering into single nights of terror. This wasn't metaphorical language. The text presents it as literal alteration of temporal reality based on spiritual forces at work. This concept revolutionizes our understanding of biblical chronology. If time itself could be supernaturally manipulated during humanity's earliest days, then our entire framework for interpreting ancient history might be fundamentally flawed. The genealogies and timelines we've constructed from biblical data may represent only surface-level understanding of far more complex spiritual realities. The manuscript also reveals disturbing details about the physical transformation that occurred during the fall. According to this account, Adam and Eve didn't just lose spiritual privileges. Their very bodies were altered at a molecular level. The text describes how their flesh became dense and heavy, their bones brittle, their blood thick and dark. Most significantly, their reproductive capacity was fundamentally changed. Before the fall, according to this text, human reproduction was meant to be a purely spiritual act. Children were to be conceived through divine will and pure intention. Without the physical processes we now consider normal, the sexual desire and physical union that became necessary after the fall represented not God's original design, but an accommodation to humanity's diminished state. This interpretation has profound implications for how we understand human sexuality and family relationships. Rather than seeing physical intimacy as inherently good or inherently sinful, this ancient text presents it as a temporary necessity, a bridge between our fallen condition and our eventual restoration to divine nature. The book goes on to describe how this change affected Adam and Eve's relationship with each other. Before the fall, they communicated through what the text calls light language, direct transmission of thoughts and emotions through their divine radiance. After the fall, they were forced to rely on crude vocal sounds and physical gestures, leading to misunderstandings and conflicts that were impossible in their original state. This degradation of communication created the foundation for all future human relationship problems. According to the text, every argument, every betrayal, every breakdown in human connection can be traced back to our loss of this perfect spiritual communication system. We're all essentially speaking different languages now, even when we use the same words. But perhaps the most controversial revelation in this forbidden manuscript concerns the true identity and origin of Satan himself. The lost book of Adam and Eve presents a version of the devil's backstory that contradicts much of traditional Christian demonology. According to this ancient account, Satan wasn't originally a fallen angel named Lucifer who rebelled against God out of pride. Instead, the text describes him as a being created specifically to test and refine human beings. A divine prosecutor whose role was to challenge and strengthen faith through adversity. His opposition to Adam and Eve wasn't rebellion against God's will, but fulfillment of his designated function. This interpretation suggests that Satan's attacks on humanity serve a divine purpose, even when they cause tremendous suffering. Every temptation, every trial, every moment of spiritual warfare represents an opportunity for human beings to develop spiritual strength and demonstrate their commitment to divine principles. The text describes elaborate testing scenarios orchestrated by Satan under divine supervision. These weren't random attacks or chaotic evil, but carefully designed spiritual examinations meant to reveal and develop different aspects of human character. Adam and Eve's responses to these tests would determine not just their own spiritual development, but the trajectory of all future human evolution. This theological framework completely reframes how we understand suffering and evil in the world. Rather than seeing hardship as evidence of God's absence or cruelty, this ancient text presents it as proof of God's commitment to human spiritual development. Every challenge becomes an opportunity for growth, every setback a chance to demonstrate faith. The book also reveals stunning details about the angelic realm and its relationship to human affairs. According to this manuscript, angels aren't distant spiritual beings who occasionally intervene in human events. They're active participants in an ongoing cosmic drama, with different orders of angels assigned specific roles in human spiritual development. The text describes guardian angels who were assigned to individual human beings from the moment of creation. These weren't just protective spirits, but divine tutors responsible for guiding human spiritual evolution. Each person was paired with an angel whose own spiritual advancement depended on successfully shepherding their human charge through the challenges of earthly existence. This creates a fascinating dynamic where human and angelic destinies are intertwined. Our spiritual choices don't just affect our own eternal fate, they impact the angels assigned to guide us. This adds tremendous weight to moral decisions and suggests that human behavior has cosmic consequences we rarely consider. The manuscript also describes fallen angels who chose to abandon their assigned roles and pursue their own agenda. Unlike the traditional narrative of a single rebellion led by Lucifer, this text presents ongoing defections and betrayals within the angelic ranks. Some angels became corrupted by excessive attachment to their human charges, leading them to interfere with divine plans in misguided attempts to protect people from necessary suffering. Other angels fell into what the text calls knowledge pride, becoming so fascinated with divine secrets that they forgot their service obligations and began hoarding wisdom for personal gratification. Still, others succumbed to what might be called power addiction, using their supernatural abilities for personal satisfaction rather than human benefit. These fallen angels didn't disappear into some distant hell. According to the lost book of Adam and Eve, they remained active on Earth, continuing to interact with human beings, but now serving their own interests rather than divine purposes. They became the source of false religious teachings, deceptive spiritual experiences, and corrupted wisdom traditions that would plague humanity throughout history. This explains why the text places such emphasis on discernment and spiritual testing. Not every supernatural experience or mystical revelation comes from divine sources. Fallen angels retain many of their original abilities and can produce convincing counterfeits of authentic spiritual phenomena. Learning to distinguish between divine and demonic influences becomes crucial for anyone seeking genuine spiritual advancement. The book provides detailed instructions for such discernment, describing specific signs and tests that can reveal the true source of spiritual experiences. Divine communications, according to the text, always lead to increased humility, greater love for others, and deeper commitment to righteousness. They produce peace even in the midst of challenging circumstances and create unity between people of genuine faith. Demonic influences, by contrast, generate pride, division, and moral compromise. They may initially appear beneficial or enlightening, but they ultimately lead to spiritual confusion, relational breakdown, and ethical deterioration. Even when they produce temporary pleasure or apparent success, they leave people spiritually weakened and more vulnerable to future deception. The manuscript's treatment of prophecy and divine revelation is particularly significant for understanding why it was excluded from mainstream Christian canon. According to this text, prophetic ability wasn't limited to specially chosen individuals like biblical prophets. Instead, it was presented as a natural human capacity that could be developed through proper spiritual discipline and divine grace. The book describes how Adam received increasingly detailed prophetic visions as he matured spiritually during his exile from Eden. These weren't one-time supernatural events, but an ongoing process of divine education that continued throughout his earthly life. God revealed to him not just future events, but the spiritual principles and cosmic laws that govern all existence. Most remarkably, the text claims that this prophetic capacity was passed down to Adam's descendants and remains available to all human beings who seek it with sufficient dedication. The implication is that anyone can potentially receive direct divine revelation, prophetic insights, and supernatural guidance if they're willing to undergo the necessary spiritual preparation. This democratization of prophetic ability would have been deeply threatening to religious authorities who claimed exclusive rights to interpret divine will. If ordinary believers could receive their own revelations and prophetic insights, it would undermine the institutional control that religious hierarchies depended upon for their power and influence. The book also describes how these prophetic abilities were gradually suppressed and forgotten as human civilization became increasingly corrupt. Each generation retained less spiritual sensitivity than the previous one, until most people completely lost awareness of their divine heritage and supernatural potential. According to the text, this wasn't an inevitable decline, but the result of deliberate choices to prioritize material concerns over spiritual development. As humans became more focused on physical comfort, technological advancement, and social status, they gradually abandoned the practices and disciplines necessary for maintaining connection with divine realms. The lost book of Adam and Eve presents this spiritual decline as the real tragedy of human history. Not just the loss of Eden, but the loss of our divine nature and supernatural abilities. We've forgotten who we really are and what we're capable of becoming. But the text also offers hope for recovery. According to this ancient manuscript, the spiritual capacities that were lost can be regained through proper understanding and dedicated practice. The divine spark that was dimmed but never extinguished can be rekindled. The prophetic abilities that were suppressed can be restored. The supernatural wisdom that was forgotten can be remembered. This restoration isn't just individual, it's collective. The book describes how groups of people working together in spiritual unity can accomplish things that seem impossible for individuals acting alone. When human beings align their wills with divine purposes and support each other in spiritual growth, they can literally change the course of history and alter the balance between good and evil in the world. The manuscript's vision of human potential extends far beyond conventional religious expectations. According to this text, we're not meant to be passive recipients of divine grace, waiting helplessly for salvation from external sources. We're meant to be active partners with God in the ongoing work of creation and redemption. This partnership involves developing our dormant spiritual abilities, learning to perceive invisible realities, and taking responsibility for our role in the cosmic battle between light and darkness. It requires courage to challenge systems that suppress spiritual truth, wisdom to discern between authentic and counterfeit spiritual experiences, and commitment to pursue divine purposes, even when they conflict with social expectations. The lost book of Adam and Eve doesn't just tell us what happened in humanity's distant past. It reveals what's possible in our immediate future. It suggests that we're living in a time when ancient spiritual truths are being recovered, when suppressed wisdom traditions are being restored, and when ordinary people are beginning to remember their divine heritage. The rediscovery of this forbidden manuscript isn't just an academic curiosity, it's part of a larger spiritual awakening that's challenging the foundations of institutional religion and recovering authentic spiritual truth. We're being invited to reclaim our identity as beings of light, to develop our dormant supernatural abilities, and to participate consciously in the cosmic drama that has been unfolding since the beginning of time. This invitation comes with both tremendous opportunity and serious responsibility. The spiritual power that this ancient text describes can be used for great good or great harm, depending on the character and intentions of those who access it. The prophetic abilities it promises can lead to genuine divine service or dangerous spiritual pride. The lost book of Adam and Eve doesn't just reveal hidden history. It challenges us to become the people we were originally created to be. It calls us to move beyond passive religious observance toward active spiritual partnership with divine purposes. It invites us to remember our true nature and reclaim our cosmic destiny. But this transformation isn't automatic or easy. It requires dedication, discernment, and courage that most people aren't willing to develop. It demands that we question everything we've been taught about reality and be willing to embrace truths that might isolate us from conventional society. The forbidden knowledge contained in this ancient manuscript comes with a price. The price of responsibility for using divine wisdom in service of others rather than personal gratification. Those who seek to recover their spiritual heritage must be prepared to serve as bridges between heaven and earth, helping others remember their own divine nature while remaining humble about their role in God's larger plan. The story we've uncovered challenges everything about conventional Christianity, but it also offers hope for a spiritual awakening that could transform not just individual lives, but the entire course of human civilization. We stand at a crossroads where ancient wisdom meets modern crisis, where forbidden truth encounters desperate need for genuine spiritual guidance. The choice before us is clear. We can continue accepting the limited version of Christianity that institutional religion has handed down to us, or we can courageously explore the deeper truths that texts like the lost book of Adam and Eve preserve for those willing to seek them. This choice isn't just personal, it has generational implications. The lost book of Adam and Eve reveals that spiritual knowledge and divine capacity aren't just individual gifts, but family inheritances that can be passed down through bloodlines or lost through neglect. The decisions we make about pursuing authentic spiritual truth will determine what our children and grandchildren inherit from us. According to this ancient manuscript, Adam wasn't just the first human being, he was the first spiritual teacher, responsible for transmitting divine knowledge to his descendants. The text describes how he spent centuries after his exile from Eden, developing systematic methods for passing down the spiritual wisdom he had received directly from God. These weren't casual conversations or informal teachings. The book presents Adam as establishing formal schools of spiritual instruction, creating detailed curricula for different levels of spiritual development, and training selected descendants to become teachers themselves. This educational system was designed to ensure that divine knowledge would be preserved and transmitted accurately across generations. The manuscript describes how this system worked for several generations after Adam's death. His son Seth became the primary guardian of these teachings, establishing a lineage of spiritual instructors who maintained the purity of divine revelation. These teachers didn't just preserve information, they maintained the living connection between heaven and earth that made ongoing divine communication possible. But the text also describes how this system gradually broke down as human civilization became more complex and corrupted. Later generations began modifying the teachings to suit their own preferences and political needs. Pure spiritual instruction became mixed with human philosophy and cultural assumptions. Divine revelation became filtered through institutional interests. By the time of Noah's flood, according to this account, authentic spiritual knowledge had become so corrupted and diluted that most people had lost all connection to their divine heritage. The flood wasn't just punishment for moral corruption. It was a divine reset intended to preserve the pure lineage through which authentic spiritual truth could be recovered. This historical pattern has repeated itself throughout human history. Periods of spiritual awakening and divine revelation are followed by gradual corruption and institutional capture. Pure truth becomes mixed with human error. Living spiritual experience becomes replaced by dead religious ritual. The lost book of Adam and Eve suggests that we're currently living through another such cycle. Ancient spiritual truths are being recovered and made available to those who seek them, but they're also being corrupted and commercialized by people more interested in personal gain than divine service. The manuscript warns against this corruption by providing specific criteria for identifying authentic spiritual teachers and genuine divine revelation. True spiritual instruction, according to the text, always emphasizes humility over pride, service over personal advancement, and divine will over human preference. Authentic spiritual teachers don't seek personal glory or material gain from their teaching. They don't claim exclusive access to divine truth or demand unquestioning obedience from their students. Instead, they point people toward direct relationship with God and encourage independent spiritual development. Genuine divine revelation produces specific fruits in people's lives. It increases their capacity for love, strengthens their commitment to righteousness, and develops their ability to discern between good and evil. It creates unity between people of different backgrounds while maintaining respect for individual spiritual journeys. Counterfeit spiritual teaching, by contrast, generates division, promotes spiritual pride, and ultimately leads people away from genuine divine connection. It may initially appear beneficial or enlightening, but it produces confusion, moral compromise, and relational breakdown over time. The book provides detailed instructions for testing spiritual experiences and evaluating spiritual teachers. These tests aren't based on external credentials or institutional authority, but on the actual fruits produced in people's lives and the alignment with divine principles revealed in authentic scripture. According to this ancient text, the ability to make these distinctions isn't just intellectual. It requires spiritual sensitivity that must be developed through practice and divine grace. This discernment is presented as one of the most crucial skills for anyone seeking authentic spiritual growth in a world filled with deceptive alternatives. The manuscript also reveals disturbing information about how spiritual deception operates at institutional levels. According to this account, fallen angels don't just tempt individuals. They systematically infiltrate religious organizations, educational systems, and cultural institutions to promote false spiritual teachings on a massive scale. These infiltrations aren't always obvious or dramatic. Often, they involve subtle shifts in emphasis, gradual changes in doctrine, or slow erosion of spiritual practices that maintain connection with divine realms. Over time, entire religious traditions can become corrupted without most of their followers realizing what has happened. The text describes how this process operated in ancient times, leading to the development of false religious systems that mix divine truth with demonic deception. These hybrid religions often retained enough authentic spiritual elements to seem credible, while introducing teachings that ultimately led people away from genuine divine connection. This historical pattern explains why the lost book of Adam and Eve was excluded from mainstream Christian canon. If this text accurately describes how spiritual deception operates at institutional levels, then its preservation would threaten the very systems that had become corrupted by fallen angelic influence. The manuscript suggests that similar processes are operating in modern times, with fallen angels working to corrupt contemporary spiritual movements and religious institutions. This creates a challenging environment for anyone seeking authentic spiritual truth, since even seemingly legitimate religious authorities may be compromised. But the text also provides hope by describing how divine truth has always survived through hidden channels and faithful remnants. In every generation, according to this account, God preserves authentic spiritual knowledge through people who maintain pure connection with divine realms despite institutional corruption. These faithful remnants don't usually hold official religious positions or enjoy public recognition. They're often marginalized or persecuted by corrupt religious establishments, but they maintain the living connection between heaven and earth that makes ongoing divine revelation possible. The Lost Book of Adam and Eve suggests that we're currently living in a time when these hidden streams of authentic spiritual truth are being revealed to wider audiences. Ancient manuscripts are being discovered, suppressed teachings are being recovered, and people are beginning to remember spiritual capacities they had forgotten. This recovery process isn't happening through official religious channels or institutional initiatives. Instead, it's occurring through individual seekers who are willing to look beyond conventional sources for spiritual truth. These people are rediscovering direct connection with divine realms and recovering supernatural abilities that mainstream religion claims ended with the biblical era. The manuscript presents this spiritual awakening as both a tremendous opportunity and a serious warning. Those who recover authentic spiritual abilities bear responsibility for using them in service of divine purposes rather than personal gratification. The power to receive prophetic revelations, perform supernatural healings, and perceive invisible realities can be corrupted if it's pursued for selfish reasons. The text describes how this corruption operated in ancient times, leading to the development of occult practices and false mystical traditions. When people sought spiritual power for personal advancement rather than divine service, they became vulnerable to deception by fallen angels who were eager to exploit their pride and ambition. This same pattern continues in modern times. The recovery of authentic spiritual abilities is accompanied by proliferation of counterfeit alternatives that promise similar results through easier methods. These false paths may initially seem successful, but they ultimately lead to spiritual bondage and separation from genuine divine connection. The Lost Book of Adam and Eve provides detailed warnings about these counterfeit spiritual paths. It describes specific signs that can help sincere seekers distinguish between authentic and false spiritual experiences. It also outlines the character development and spiritual disciplines necessary for safely accessing supernatural abilities without being corrupted by them. According to this ancient text, the most important protection against spiritual deception is maintaining pure motivation for seeking divine truth. Those who pursue spiritual development primarily to serve others and glorify God are protected by divine grace from most forms of deception. Those who seek spiritual power for personal reasons become vulnerable to fallen angelic manipulation. The manuscript also emphasizes the importance of community in spiritual development. Isolated individuals are more susceptible to deception than those who maintain accountability relationships with other sincere seekers. But this community must be based on shared commitment to divine truth rather than institutional loyalty or social conformity. True spiritual community, according to the text, involves people supporting each other's direct relationship with God rather than dependence on human authorities. Members of such communities encourage each other to seek personal divine revelation while providing discernment and accountability to prevent individual deception. The Lost Book of Adam and Eve describes how such communities operated in ancient times and how they can be restored in modern contexts. These weren't formal organizations with official structures, but organic relationships between people who recognized each other's authentic spiritual commitment and supported each other's growth. The text suggests that the formation of such communities is one of the key signs that authentic spiritual awakening is occurring. When people begin recovering direct connection with divine realms, they naturally seek fellowship with others who share their spiritual experience and commitment. But the manuscript also warns that these communities will face opposition from both corrupt religious institutions and secular authorities, who feel threatened by people claiming direct access to divine truth. Throughout history, authentic spiritual communities have been persecuted, suppressed, or forced underground by powers that depend on controlling access to spiritual authority. This opposition isn't just external, it also comes from within, as fallen angels work to infiltrate and corrupt authentic spiritual communities, just as they corrupt religious institutions. Maintaining the purity and authenticity of spiritual community requires constant vigilance and dependence on divine guidance. The Lost Book of Adam and Eve concludes with prophetic visions that Adam received about humanity's ultimate destiny. According to this ancient account, the spiritual awakening currently beginning will eventually lead to complete restoration of humanity's divine nature and supernatural abilities. This restoration won't happen automatically or universally. It will require individual choice and commitment from people who are willing to pursue authentic spiritual development despite social pressure and institutional opposition. But those who make this choice will recover capacities that seem impossible from our current perspective. The text describes a future time when human beings will again communicate through direct spiritual connection, when prophetic revelation will be common rather than rare, when supernatural healing will be normal rather than miraculous. This isn't presented as a distant millennial kingdom, but as a possibility that could emerge within current human generations. But this transformation requires a critical mass of people who recover their spiritual heritage and begin operating in supernatural abilities. The Lost Book of Adam and Eve suggests that we're approaching that critical threshold as ancient spiritual truths are being recovered and made available to wider audiences than ever before. The choice facing each individual is whether to participate in this spiritual awakening or remain trapped in the limited consciousness that institutional religion and secular materialism have promoted. This choice will determine not just personal destiny, but the entire trajectory of human civilization. The forbidden knowledge contained in this ancient manuscript isn't just historical information, it's a roadmap for recovering our divine heritage and fulfilling our cosmic purpose. But accessing this knowledge requires courage to question everything we've been taught about reality and commitment to pursue truth regardless of social consequences. The Lost Book of Adam and Eve doesn't just reveal what happened in humanity's distant past, it unveils what's possible in our immediate future. It challenges us to remember who we really are, reclaim what we've lost, and become what we were always meant to be. This ancient text stands as testament to the fact that divine truth cannot be permanently suppressed. No matter how many books are banned, how many teachings are corrupted, or how many authentic spiritual leaders are silenced, the core message survives. It emerges in each generation through people who are willing to seek beyond conventional sources and pay the price for authentic spiritual development. We stand at a moment in history when this forbidden knowledge is becoming available to anyone sincere enough to seek it and courageous enough to act upon it. The question isn't whether these ancient truths are real. The question is whether we're prepared to embrace them and live according to their implications. The Lost Book of Adam and Eve offers us a choice between comfortable religious conformity and dangerous spiritual adventure. It invites us to move beyond passive belief toward active participation in the cosmic drama that has been unfolding since the beginning of time. This invitation comes with no guarantees of ease or safety. The path it describes is challenging, requiring sacrifice and commitment that most people aren't willing to make. But for those who accept the challenge, it promises recovery of abilities and experiences that make ordinary human existence seem pale by comparison. The ancient manuscript reminds us that we weren't created to be passive observers of spiritual reality. We were designed to be active participants in divine purposes. We carry within us the capacity to commune directly with our Creator, to receive prophetic revelations, to exercise supernatural abilities, and to participate consciously in the ongoing work of creation and redemption. But recovering these capacities requires more than intellectual understanding. It demands transformation of character, purification of motivation, and alignment of will with divine purposes. The lost book of Adam and Eve doesn't just reveal hidden history. It calls us to become the people we were originally created to be. This calling echoes across the centuries from humanity's first parents to everyone who reads these words today. The same choice that confronted Adam and Eve in Eden confronts us now. Will we trust divine wisdom or rely on human understanding? Will we pursue spiritual development or settle for material comfort? Will we seek authentic relationship with God or accept institutional substitutes? The forbidden book that religious authorities tried to bury has emerged from its hiding place to challenge a new generation. Its message is clear. The time has come to remember who we are, reclaim what we've lost, and step boldly into the divine destiny that awaits those courageous enough to pursue it. The choice is ours. The opportunity is now. The ancient wisdom preserved in this forbidden text awaits those ready to receive it and act upon its revolutionary implications for human potential and spiritual possibility. The revelations don't stop there. What we discover next in this forbidden manuscript challenges the very foundation of everything we think we know about the nature of good and evil itself. The lost book of Adam and Eve presents a cosmological framework so radical, so fundamentally different from conventional theology, that it forces us to reconsider the entire purpose of human existence on Earth. According to this ancient text, the spiritual realm operates according to what it calls the law of polarity, a divine principle stating that all growth and development requires the presence of opposing forces. Light can only be recognized in contrast to darkness. Good can only be chosen when evil presents itself as an alternative. Strength can only be developed through resistance. This isn't the simplistic dualism that many religious traditions promote, where good and evil are presented as equally powerful opposing forces locked in eternal combat. Instead, the manuscript describes a sophisticated spiritual ecology where apparent opposition serves ultimate divine purposes. Even what appears to be evil serves to refine and strengthen what is truly good. The text reveals that this principle was built into creation from the very beginning. Adam and Eve weren't placed in Eden to live in blissful ignorance forever. They were positioned there as part of an elaborate divine educational system designed to develop their capacity for moral reasoning and spiritual discernment. The tree of knowledge of good and evil wasn't a trap or a test of obedience. It was a graduation requirement. According to this account, Adam and Eve were always meant to eat from that tree, but only after they had developed sufficient spiritual maturity to handle the knowledge it contained without being corrupted by it. Their premature consumption of the fruit wasn't the ultimate tragedy. It was a temporary setback in a larger educational process that would continue throughout human history. The exile from Eden wasn't permanent punishment, but temporary remedial education, designed to develop through hardship the character qualities they should have developed through patient spiritual discipline. This interpretation completely transforms how we understand suffering and adversity in human life. Rather than seeing difficulties as evidence of divine displeasure or cosmic injustice, this ancient framework presents them as precisely calibrated educational experiences designed to develop specific aspects of character and spiritual capacity. Every challenge we face, according to this text, is perfectly matched to our current level of spiritual development and our particular areas of needed growth. Nothing we encounter is random or meaningless. Every setback serves a purpose in our larger spiritual education, even when we can't perceive that purpose from our limited perspective. But the manuscript goes even further in its radical reinterpretation of spiritual reality. It describes what it calls the Council of Purposes, an assembly of divine beings who meet regularly to design and coordinate the spiritual educational experiences of human beings throughout history. This council includes not only angels and archangels, but also advanced human souls who have completed their own earthly education and now serve as spiritual teachers and guides for those still in physical incarnation. These beings work together to create the complex web of circumstances, relationships, and challenges that provide optimal learning opportunities for souls at every level of development. According to this account, nothing that happens to any individual is arbitrary or accidental. Every birth, every death, every meeting between souls, every opportunity, and every obstacle is carefully orchestrated by this council to serve the highest good of all involved. What appears to be random coincidence is actually precise divine coordination, operating at levels we rarely perceive. This revelation addresses one of the most troubling questions that plague human existence. Why do bad things happen to good people? According to the lost book of Adam and Eve, the question itself is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of spiritual reality. From the Council's perspective, there are no bad things, only educational experiences that serve the soul's development. What we perceive as tragedy or injustice represents our limited understanding of the larger spiritual curriculum in which we're all enrolled. Every soul experiences exactly what it needs for optimal growth, even when those experiences involve significant challenge or apparent loss. This doesn't minimize the reality of human pain or suggest that suffering should be accepted passively. Instead, it provides a framework for understanding that pain serves a purpose, and that our response to difficult circumstances determines whether they achieve their intended educational effect. The manuscript describes how advanced souls actually volunteer for particularly challenging incarnations because they understand that greater difficulty produces accelerated spiritual development. From this perspective, those who face the most severe trials are often the most spiritually advanced beings, choosing difficult lives specifically because they're capable of extracting maximum growth from adverse circumstances. This cosmic perspective radically alters how we evaluate success and failure in human life. Material prosperity and social recognition may indicate very little about someone's actual spiritual advancement. Meanwhile, those who face poverty, illness, or social rejection may be undergoing precisely the experiences they need to develop qualities that can't be cultivated through comfort and ease. The text also reveals disturbing information about how this educational system has been corrupted and exploited by fallen beings who seek to subvert divine purposes for their own ends. While the Council of Purposes designs experiences to promote spiritual growth, rebellious entities work to ensure that humans respond to these experiences in ways that retard rather than advance their development. These corrupting influences don't usually operate through dramatic supernatural manifestations. Instead, they work through subtle psychological manipulation, cultural programming, and institutional structures that encourage people to interpret their experiences in ways that generate spiritual stagnation rather than growth. For example, when someone faces financial difficulty, the divine educational purpose might be to develop trust in spiritual provision and detachment from material security. But corrupting influences work to ensure that person responds with anxiety, resentment, or desperate grasping that reinforces rather than transcends material attachments. Similarly, when relationships face conflict, the spiritual lesson might involve developing forgiveness, humility, or clearer communication. But fallen influences promote responses like blame, revenge, or emotional withdrawal that damage rather than strengthen the capacity for genuine love. The lost book of Adam and Eve stands as more than a forgotten manuscript. It's a key to understanding our true spiritual heritage and unlimited potential. This ancient text reveals that we are not fallen creatures awaiting salvation, but beings of light temporarily separated from our divine nature, carrying within us the spark of our Creator's own essence. The forbidden knowledge preserved in Ethiopian monasteries for over 15 centuries challenges us to move beyond institutional limitations and remember who we were always meant to be. The choice before each of us is clear. Will we continue accepting the diminished version of Christianity handed down through corrupted channels? Or will we courageously reclaim the authentic spiritual truths that this remarkable text preserves? The time for awakening is now, and the ancient wisdom awaits those brave enough to seek it.